Now, before we begin this retrospective, I want to tell you a story. It was late 2015 and I'd just been invited to watch Star Wars The Force Awakens in cinemas, and I was hyped over the moon. At this point in time, the only other Star Wars movie I'd seen in cinema was Revenge of the Sith, and 10-year-old me was blown away by that film, regardless of the dodgy dialogue. And now we had a competent director with the backing of one of the biggest movie studios in the world. Episode 7 was gonna be a smash hit. And it was total garbage. Yeah, I walked out of the cinema really disappointed. I was like, they seriously retconned the end of Return of the Jedi to give us a less impressive remake of A New Hope? To me, The Force Awakens became the first main series Star Wars movie I genuinely hated. But to my shock, everyone else seemed to love it. It's a real isolating feeling to have such a different reaction to those around you, and it definitely felt like something was wrong with me for not liking this film. So why do I bring up this story? Well, that feeling of isolation I felt seeing the positive reviews to a film I hated was the same feeling I got when this game came out. A game which, in my mind, betrayed almost everything its series stood for and was arguably one of the worst entries ever. However, to my shock, the vast majority of the fanbase was parading this game around as one of the best entries in over a decade, not only putting it alongside other series greats like Symphonia and Vesperia, but in some cases even claiming it to be the best game in the series. And while the game did have its haters, I didn't particularly resonate with most of them, as their issues seemed to be more with the story and characters, which wasn't something I had too much of a problem with. So today, I'll put this game back into my PS4 as I try to answer the question on my mind. Do I just think differently to most Tales fans, or did I just misunderstand 2021's Tales of Arise? Now, just a reminder that this Tales of Arise retrospective was brought to you by my lovely patrons Cameron Strauss and Echolocation. For as little as $3 a month, you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosanctum video, as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content, linked in the description below. Following the release of Tales of Berseria, the team at Bandai Namco decided to take a step back from the series and evaluate where the series was going. Despite being well received by fans and critics, Tales of Berseria, like most other recent entries, had only seen moderate success, selling around 1 million units before plateauing. The reality was, the series hadn't really seen any major growth in over a decade, thus the team really wanted a game which could break through the series' obscurity and attract new fans to the franchise. While the developers discussed the best way to continue the series, other Tales developers soon moved on to other projects. The first was a port of the PS3 version of Tales of Vesperia to celebrate its 10th anniversary. This definitive edition of Vesperia was developed as a multi-platform title for all modern systems, in effect marking an end to the series' infamous one console at a time approach to game releases. While part of the team would work on the Vesperia port, the rest of the team would see split up to focus on brand new games, aimed at the current generation of systems. The first was a new action game called Scarlet Nexus, which took cues from other popular action games at the time like Nier Automata, and would be aimed as a mid-2021 release. Meanwhile, the rest of the team would begin work on an action JRPG which they had tentatively called Arise. Despite being quite a different game from past Tales entries, the team felt like Arise had enough in common with the Tales series that it should be turned into the latest entry in the series. With Arise, now Tales of Arise, the remaining developers from Tales of Vesperia DE would come over to help finish the project. Arguably one of the biggest focuses of this new game was the graphics. With the series finally abandoning the PlayStation 3, it was a great opportunity to upgrade the presentation. Thus, for the first time in the series, the team would not use an in-house engine, instead relying on Unreal Engine 4. By using the Unreal Engine, the team was easily able to produce shaders and particle effects well beyond those seen in past games. Alongside the graphics, the team also wanted to change the combat system. There was a general concern that people had been turned off from recent Tales games due to the complexities of their combat systems. Thus, the team sought to simplify the combat to make it a more easily understood affair. This included removing things like art trees and guard charges. Instead, the team would try and bring back classic systems such as regular attacks, as well as series classic arts. As for the game's story, the team wanted to keep the more darker story established in Berseria, but bring back some of the more familiar story beats such as racism and the two worlds idea used in multiple entries. This would lead writer Takaaki Okuda to develop a plot surrounding a world enslaved for 300 years by its sister world. In this world, the slaves would rise up to release their shackles of the oppressor in what the team would characterise as a Telling the Dawn of the Heart RPG. In the arts department, shockingly, neither Kosuke Fujishima or Mitsumi Inamata or even Daigo Okamura would work on Tales of Arise. Instead, small-time artist Minoru Iwamoto would be tasked with designing the cast. Iwamoto had previously worked on Tales of Systeria and Berseria under the other artists, and thus Arise would be their first time leading the art direction. Tales of Arise would be announced at E3 2019, although it would be leaked a few days earlier. The game would be targeted for a 2020 release, in line with the series' 25th anniversary, and like Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition, it would be a multi-platform title, minus the Nintendo Switch. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it would be delayed to 2021. As a result of the delay, 9th gen consoles would come onto the market. Hoping not to repeat the mistake of Systeria missing current generation consoles, Arise would quickly be ported over to the PS5 and Xbox X series to release day and date with the other releases. Tales of Arise would eventually release on the 10th of September across all regions in what was the series' first. With Bandai Namco going hard on promoting the game, Arise would gather a bunch of public attention in the West, the likes of which hadn't really been seen since Tales of Symphonia. As a result, fan anticipation was quite high going into this game. So let's see how it turned out. Tales of Arise's story begins with a recap of past events. 300 years ago, the world of Dana was invaded and occupied by its neighbouring world of Renna. The Rennans then enslaved the Danans to toil and hard labour for the Rennans' benefits. We then jump to the present day in the region of Calaglia, where we see Danan slaves toil in a quarry under the watchful eyes of the Renan guards. It's here that we are introduced to Iron Mask, a mysterious Danan whose head is encased in a metal helmet and cannot feel any pain, nor has any memories of his past life. One day, Iron Mask is assigned to push a wagon when he discovers a mysterious Renan woman. Seeing the woman being pursued by the guards, he decides to help the woman escape. In the process, Iron Mask soon runs into the Calaglian resistance, led by their leader Zephyr. Alphen then winds up with the group, who take him and the woman back to their hideout. There, Iron Mask learns about the resistance group, as well as more about the mysterious woman, whose name turns out to be Shion. Suddenly, the hideout comes under attack by the Rennans. While the group manages to make it to the entrance, they soon find themselves face to face with a platoon of armoured soldiers. One of the soldiers proceeds to shoot Shion in the chest with an arrow. In a panic, Iron Mask tries to remove the arrow, but instead it turns into a powerful flaming sword. While the sword burns Iron Mask's hand, his inability to feel pain allows him to wield the sword effortlessly and dispatch the squad of soldiers. Amazed by his ability to wield the sword, Shion realises that Iron Mask might be able to help her overthrow the Renan lords. Meeting up with Zephyr, the three make their way to Uzbek, a small farming town where Iron Mask learns that the reasons Danan toil in labour camps is so the Rennans can generate astral energy to power their technology, and in fact the regions of Dana are currently in competition with one another to generate the most energy in order to become the next sovereign of Renna. They soon formulate a plan to overthrow Lord Bolsef of Calaglia. However, first Iron Mask and Shion need to change their clothes. After sorting that out, Iron Mask learns that as a form of indirect punishment for Zephyr's rebellion, Bolsef has ordered the mass killings of Danans at the quarry. Iron Mask and Shion quickly rush to the quarry where they find several murdered Danans. While they're able to save a handful, the sheer devastation enrages Iron Mask to launch a full-scale assault on Bolsef's castle. Figuring now is the time to strike, Zephyr launches a frontal assault on Bolsef's castle while directing Iron Mask and Shion to sneak around the back. Entering the castle, Iron Mask sees a giant ball of fire which contains all of the astral energy being absorbed by the Danan labourers. At the top of the castle, the two face down Bolsef, who after an intense battle breaks off part of Iron Mask's helmet. Bolsef then retreats to the roof of the castle. At the roof, Bolsef attempts to use the power of the astral ball to empower him, but instead turns into a flaming beast of fire. The beast soon grabs Bolsef and cooks him to a crisp. Meanwhile, Iron Mask, acting on instinct, uses the flaming sword to control the flow of astral energy and absorb the fire monster into a powerful flaming attack, which he then uses to blast down the walls of Calaglia, allowing the now freed slaves to finally leave the region. It's also at this moment that Iron Mask finally remembers his name as Alphen and offers to help Shion and Zephyr liberate the other regions of Dana so that the whole world can be free. And the story continues from there as the trio head off from Calaglia to explore the other regions and liberate their enslaved citizens from the clutches of Renna. And for the full story breakdown, you basically know the deal by now, so let's get on with the presentation. Now, it might surprise you to hear that I have next to no negative to say about Arise when it comes to its presentation, as it's arguably the best looking game in the series. While I like it when companies stick to their own in-house game engines, I cannot argue that the move to Unreal Engine 4 has come with a massive tick up in the graphics department. From the different particle effects to the detailed models of the characters, even I as a fan of the previous Tales games' looks cannot argue that Arise outclasses them in nearly every way. Arise doesn't just blow me away with its graphics, as its world design is also a massive step up over past games. While previous games often had interestingly designed towns and dungeons, the overworld and field maps were often just large open plains with very little of note for the player to explore. Arise on the other hand puts extra effort to give detail to these field maps, such as natural landmarks and man-made structures, such that you're incentivized to explore this world just so you can see these places and not just to find collectibles. Speaking about collectibles, they've returned from past games but now actually look like what they are instead of sparkling gems. They're also much more of a challenge to collect, as for the first time in the series we have basic platforming, with the characters now being able to jump and swim whenever they want, instead of the scripted moments of past games. While it's true that these controls make the game feel very Untales-like, I argue that more technical play outside of combat can only be considered a good thing. Alongside finding collectibles, you can also partake in field actions. These field actions range from disabling barriers to healing injured citizens, but come at the cost of cure points, which I'll talk more about in the gameplay section. To regain CP as well as health, you can either rest at campsites or at inns located in towns. At these resting places you can use found materials to both cook food as well as forge new weapons for the party. Also, while you're in towns, you can also find citizens to take side quests from in your classic JRPG style. By completing these side quests, you'll be rewarded with skill points which are used on the character's skill trees. These skill trees are somewhat a combination of Grace's and Zillia's skill trees, which you must first unlock the title in-game before you can unlock the skills within it using skill points. While this system is simple to use, the high price of skills unfortunately makes it a real grind to unlock new skills, at least in the early game. Staying on the topic of the menus, I really like the 2D artwork used on the menu screens that changes with the story. It sucks however that this is one of the only places in which you can see the 2D artwork. Yeah, for some reason Arise really goes all out with the 3D models over the 2D ones, using them not only for battle portraits but also the skits too. As a series rooted in its anime origins, I found the abandonment of the 2D elements kind of unfortunate, again because the one time they do use 2D it looks incredible. Alongside removing the series' 2D elements, Arise also removes the series' classic victory screens, instead putting post-battle dialogue and the Zillia-style world party banter. While I wish the game used more 2D renders, the 3D character models of the main cast do look pretty amazing. Joining Alphen and Shion on their journey to liberate Dana are 4 other members. First up is Rinwell, a Danan who also happens to be part of a secret society of magic-wielding mages and works for the Cislodian resistance group. Also in Cislodia we meet Lore, Zephyr's estranged son, who later has a change of heart and joins the group. Later on in Elde Menencia we are joined by Dolahim Ilquaris, the Lord of Elde Menencia, who is out to reform Ridden society to no longer enslave Danans. Alongside Dolahim we are also joined by Kasara, Dolahim's knight who is greatly inspired by his ideals and seeks to help him on his quest. Finally finishing up the cast we have Rinwell's little owl companion Hootle, who gets involved with a quest to find their missing brethren scattered around the world. This quest works very similar to the cat's chest in Tales of Berseria, in which finding the owls rewards the player with more cosmetic fashion gear. In general, while I like Arise's cast, they unfortunately don't quite hit the same insane heights of the Berseria cast, and are instead more on par with the Zestiria cast. However, I still very much like the cast, and was still very much entertained by their banter. And that pretty much sums up the game's presentation, and despite causing my PS4 Pro to turn into a jet airliner in order to render the graphics, it's a pretty damn good looking game. But now we need to go to the negatives as I talk about the monstrosity which is this game's combat system. For combat, we now have the unnamed linear motion combat system. Yeah, for some reason, despite being a series staple going right back to Tales of Phantasia, the team decided not to bother giving a name to Tales of Arise's combat system. Perhaps the team decided not to give the battle system a name because, well, it's not a linear motion battle system. Yep, Arise finishes off what Berseria started and completely kills off the linear motion battle system, which has defined the series' combat for over 25 years, and instead permanently set movement to free run. With combat once again being based around free run, arts are once again assigned to the face buttons like in Berseria, although Arise does make a few tweaks. For a start, we now have the return of regular attacks, although now they can no longer be changed by directional inputs. They also are now activated off the R1 button. We also now have a dedicated jump button located on circle. This means we only have 3 face buttons dedicated to arts, and with Arise dumping art trees, this results in a very limited number of arts available to the player in combat, although later on you can unlock the ability to use L2 to activate 3 more arts. While 3 arts on the ground can be quite limiting, by jumping into the air the player will get access to 3 more aerial arts. Unlike in past games where some arts can be used on the ground and in the air, Arise exclusively splits arts between ground-based and air-based arts. This can be quite restrictive, especially with most characters initially lacking any aerial arts, instead needing to unlock them over a very costly skill tree. Certain ground-based arts also have the ability to launch you up into the air, and vice versa, some aerial arts will have the ability to bring you back down to the ground. Like in all other modern Tales games, we have the return of CC, now called the action gauge, in which different arts have different AG costs. While regular attacks don't have an AG cost, you're only able to perform 3 hits on the ground followed by 3 hits in the air. As a result, for optimal comboing, it is recommended to split your combo between ground and aerial based attacks. However, this is all dependent on getting a combo started. Following Tales of Berseria, in which overpowered characters resulted in easy to spam combos, Arise tries to make comboing a much harder feat to pull off by giving a bunch of Tales of Innocence style super armor to the enemies. When you attack enemies, you will not often cause them to flinch. To cause an enemy to flinch, you will first need to break them. The chance of breaking an enemy is determined by which art you use combined with your character's penetration stat. When you finally do break an enemy, a diamond shaped gauge will appear on the enemy. By continuing attacking the enemy, you will fill up this gauge. When the gauge is full, you'll be prompted on the side of the screen to call on one of your characters to perform a boost strike, in which they and another character will perform a pseudo mystic art to one-shot the enemy and take them out. However, if the enemy is able to break your combo before you fill the gauge, it will reset back to 0 and they will regain their super armor. To help break the enemy and build up a boost strike, you'll need to make use of the game's dodge mechanics. Unlike in previous games, characters can no longer block attacks, instead you will need to completely focus on dodging attacks. If you perfect dodge an attack, you can then perform a counter edge using the basic attack button, which will guarantee a break on the enemy. While getting a break combo going is relatively easy, keeping a break combo going can be quite difficult, and this is where boost attacks come in. Each character has a unique boost attack which is predominantly designed to take down a specific type of enemy. These attacks can be a great help in combos as they will reset your regular attack so you can perform 3 more. Boost attacks are performed by pressing the D-pad button corresponding to the pictured party member. They will slowly recharge before the party member can perform another boost attack. If you use the correct type of boost attack on the correct enemy type, you will be rewarded by downing the enemy, in which the enemy will remain broken regardless if you're comboing into them or not. By performing a bunch of boost attacks and counter edges, you will unlock the overlimit state. This gauge has unfortunately gone back to the Symphonia style of being completely hidden until activated, but it is a nice bonus when it is activated as it gives the player unlimited AG and the ability to perform mystic arts. Going over to talk about the characters more specifically, we have Alphen, who is arguably the most stock standard Tales protagonist since I guess Shin. Alphen really doesn't rock the boat much at all when it comes to being a single-wheeled swordsman protagonist with a bunch of classic Tales art like Demon Fang and Sword Rain. If he does have one unique feature, it would have to be his blazing sword, which can be drawn after an art and deals a ton of damage at the cost of hurting Alphen himself. As for his boost attack, Alphen will down any enemy, making his boost attack a very useful all-around tool. Xion on the other hand gives us our first sniper user since Ricardo, or Pascal I guess? Either way, using her sniper she can attack distance. She can also cast the majority of the game's healing spells, making her the primary healer. For her special action, Xion will throw bombs around she can then shoot at to detonate, hopefully put a status ailment on the enemy. As for her boost attack, Xion will shoot any flying enemy out of the sky, making her a good choice against winged opponents. Rinwell is your pretty typical mage, using tomes to cast magic at range. She can also attack at range using her regular attack, making her a good zoning character. For her special action, Rinwell can store up spells to use later either by casting it alongside a different spell or stacking 2 of the same spell into a higher ranked one. As for her boost attack, Rinwell copies Margilu's spell absorber and can interrupt casting enemies and steal their spells to stun them. Law is a pretty typical brawler type fighter using his fist for combat. Like other fist fighters, I find his short range somewhat difficult to get good combos going, however this does play into his special action. If Law is able to deal a bunch of damage without getting hit, he will go into awakened state and will have increased attack power. This works to turn Law into a high risk high reward fighter. As for his boost attack, Law will break the guard of any armor type enemies, making him a good matchup against slow moving tanks. While most of Arise's cast are pretty typical Tales archetypes, Kisara breaks ranks to give us our first shield-based fighter. Unlike other shield wielders like Flynn, Zelos and Cress, Kisara predominantly uses her shield as her main weapon, with her mace being a secondary weapon. Being so focused around the shield, Kisara doesn't dodge attacks, instead choosing to block them instead, with the same break bonus being applied for perfect blocks. As for a boost attack, Kisara will move to counter any charging enemy, making it a good matchup against enemies who like to run at you a lot. Finally finishing up the cast we have Dohalim, who brings back quarterstaffs to the series for the first time since the Xillia games. Like Leia before him, Dohalim is an adept caster having a bunch of healing spells alongside his martial arts, but he also, like Leia, is an adept aerial fighter, although his flexibility does make nailing down a solid combo somewhat difficult. As for his special action, Dohalim copies Leia with his elongating staff ability, which is again triggered by perfectly dodging attacks. As for his boost attack, Dohalim will cast vines that sprout around enemies and ensnare them, making him a great matchup against speedy enemies who like to dodge a lot. Now I feel like I have so far given a fair description of the battle system, but now I really want to get into why I don't like it, and that pretty much boils down to 2 words: boss fights. Do you like the game's break and boost strike systems? Well, you can throw that all out the window because the bosses are completely impervious to being broken. This baffling decision pretty much ruins the boss fights, as perfect dodging and comboing basically amounts to nothing. Instead, boss fights are a game of applying little bits of chip damage on the boss's inflated health bars until you get a scripted boost attack at set health amounts. As a result, boss fights are extremely long and boring as they really lack any creativity, with all of them boiling down to the same game of maximising damage per second while avoiding the boss's same 3 attacks, made extremely difficult by all the particle effects being blasted across the screen. With dodging all the boss's attacks being nigh impossible, you quickly need to fall back on the game's healing items for help, and this is where I have another issue. For some reason, the team decided to scrap the percent-based healing items, with apple gels now only healing 400 HP, instead of the 30% they used to. As a result, they now become practically useless in the late game, which was never something we had to deal with before. Thus, to get most of your healing, you will need to rely on healing arts. However, they now cost cure points, the same cure points used for field action. Being a party-wide gauge, you can burn through CP very fast, especially if Resurrection is cast a couple of times, which I found happens a lot in boss fights due to the AI not being particularly smart. Thus you'll need to either use very expensive orange gels, which thankfully are still percent based, or constantly rest at ins. While the boss fights are my biggest gripe with the combat system, it's not the only issue I have with this game. The combat is very one-on-one in nature, which is problematic when you get swarmed by enemies, especially casters, where failing to dodge one of their spells can result in a 0 to death attack. The game is also too heavily reliant on boost strikes, resulting in either your party insta-killing enemies or slowly chipping away at their overly large health bars. Oh, and before I forget, this game has no multiplayer. Yep, the series staple of local co-op gameplay is gone, despite modders being able to get it to work on the PC version. As a huge fan of the series co-op mode, to see it tossed aside really pisses me off, more so knowing how bad the AI can be in this game, especially the physical fighters like Laura and Alphen. Motoi Sakuraba returns to the composing role, although you wouldn't initially realise it at first, as Arise is a very different soundtrack to past games. In Arise, Sakuraba has gone fully in on the orchestral soundtrack, really moving away from the synthesizers and MIDI tunes as seen in past games. This new style of music really comes through in the overworld themes, where we get some pretty majestic brass music that really helps give a feeling of scope that you're exploring a giant world. Meanwhile, Sakuraba delivers his more stereotypical work in the form of the game's battle themes, like the thematically named Flame of Hope and the new remix of Hesperia's A Formidable Foe Stands in Our Way, called Giganzugal. Despite being closer to his normal work, the increase in orchestration does give the battle themes a unique sound compared to the other Tales games composed by Sakuraba. In some respects, Arise's soundtrack is arguably more in common with Goshina's Legendia soundtrack, which if you ask me is not a bad thing. Going over to the voice actors, we once again have a great voice cast. While I find the Rise's cast to be a downgrade from Bessaria's cast, the voice acting might actually be superior. All the main voice actors give stellar performances, and unlike Besseria, we don't have the horrible sounding characters like Bienfu and Kamoana. I also, controversially, like the grunts and quips which are used instead of full dialogue in some of the game's conversations. While most people criticise them for skipping out on full voice acting, in reality these lines wouldn't have been voiced at all if not for the quips, so in some respects I like that these conversations at least have some partial voice acting. As for the game's opening, we give in fact 2 songs. The The first, Hibana, is performed by J-pop band contiue. While I find Hibana a solid mid-Tales opening song, what I really like is the return of English covers, which we really haven't seen since Grace's F. Perhaps it's kind of tacky to have a Japanese singer perform a song in English, but I do love to be able to understand what the lyrics being said are. Alongside Hibana, Arise decides to add a second opening song at the midpoint. Interestingly, rather than create a brand new song, they instead got singer Ayaka to perform a cover of the 1995 song Hello Again. While the song is nice, the actual opening cinematic feels more like a music video than any Tales opening cinematic. Tales of Arise is a game I really struggled to grasp what the wider fanbase saw in it. While it's a very pretty game with a decent cast of characters and story, it's also a game with a poor combat system, which ranges from alright in the regular fights to downright terrible in the boss fights. While I can see why a person would like this game, I cannot understand how so many people put this game in the top echelons of the series, and in quite a few cases, declared it the best game ever. Perhaps they're just blown away by the game's graphics. I myself can easily say that this is the best looking game in the series. No other Tales game really has a world as detailed as Arise, and I haven't had this much fun exploring a world since I last played the Xeno games. The more orchestral score is also another big plus for me, as it really helps to build the scale of the adventure, and it definitely helped keep me pumped to get to the end of every dungeon. Also, while platforming isn't really a Tales thing, its inclusion was definitely very fun. While I think Arise is an incredible game in terms of its visual and audio presentation, I only find it a decent Tales game in terms of character and story. While Arise has a good cast of characters and a well-paced story, they are unfortunately caught in the shadow of the downright incredible story and characters from Tales of Berseria. Arise unfortunately lacks what makes a truly incredible Tales cast, such as reoccurring villains and character story arcs which are woven in with the main plot. As a result, a lot of the characters feel quite detached from the main plots going on. I'm also a bit unsure about the way Arise's story unfolds, with you arriving in a region, then getting involved with a mini-narrative before leaving it and never really coming back. This is in contrast to pretty much every other Tales game, which you would travel around the world and frequently go back to places you've already visited, and never really stay in one place for more than an hour or two. It's this fact combined with so many others that makes Arise feel kind of out of place in the series. However, where Arise truly feels out of place is in its combat. The attempt by the team to simplify the combat has resulted in a combat system that feels alien to the rest of the series. Unlike past entries that drew inspiration from fighting games, Arise feels like it draws more inspiration from other action JRPGs, with an over-reliance on the dodge mechanic and using the correct boost attack for the enemy being faced. The fact that most regular fights boil down to spamming the same preset combos until you get the boost strike does result in combat being very repetitive. While regular fights can still be fun despite their repetitiveness, I cannot say the same thing about boss fights. The inability to lock bosses into combos, to me, remains arguably the game's most stupid decision. What is the point of mastering my combos if I can't use them on the bosses? What's the point of perfect dodging attacks when I'm only rewarded with a single counter hit? Getting a lucky 50 hit combo and taking 50% of a boss's HP was always a really satisfying moment in past Tales games. However, here we are forced into a grindfest of chip damage and the occasional scripted boost strike. As a result, Tales of Rise arguably puts the biggest focus on character stats over gameplay skills since Tales of Destiny on the PlayStation 1. What makes boss fights even more stupid is the fact that we arguably have a great example of how they could have been so much better. In some of the dungeons you face these armoured Red Knights. They have a huge amount of health, thus a boost strike is basically needed to finish them off. However, their boost gauge is huge, thus I really had to make use of everyone's boost attack to keep the enemy stunned for as long as possible until I finally got the boost strike. Imagine if this was implemented in the boss fight, where you can easily take off 10% of the boss's HP by performing a boost strike like in regular fights. It would arguably have made boss fights a lot more fun. While I really don't like the combat in this game, it's the fundamental alien design of this game which is my biggest turn off from the game as a whole. In so many ways, Arise doesn't feel like a Tales game. Sure, it's an action JRPG with an anime aesthetic, but Tales is so much more than that. Percent-based healing items, 2D skits, and battle screens, guarding and blocking at the same time, comboing bosses, and above all the linear motion combat system. The team seems to treat these things as limitations holding the series back, instead of key series attributes that made me fall in love with the series. I encourage anyone who accuses the old games of being clunky and outdated to watch an expert on YouTube play up through a boss fight in Abyss or Vesperia and watch some of the incredible combos you can pull off in those games. I'm sorry to those of my fanbase who were hoping I'd have an epiphany on this game in the same way I did with Xenoblade Chronicles X, but my opinions really haven't changed that much since 2021. While playing Arise with the knowledge that it's nothing like past entries did help me to appreciate what it had to offer, I still find it a beautiful JRPG with a decent story but a terrible combat system. It's kind of poetic that my disdain for the Tales series was kind of ahead of its time, just like my disdain for the Star Wars sequels. Just like how The Last Jedi caused a lot of Star Wars fans to reflect on how good Star Wars The Force Awakens actually was, the way Namco handled the Tales series post-Arise has also caused a bunch of fans to start questioning the game and how truly good Tales of Arise actually was, with I think a lot of the flaws starting to be more prominent in the discussions around this game. Well, I might be finished covering the main series Tales games, but I am far from finished covering the wider Tales series, as we still have a bunch more spin-off games and remakes to cover. Also, outside of the retrospectives, I have a bunch of other Tales content which I want to do, so expect the hotly desired Tales series ranking videos soon. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this 3-year-long project to cover the Tales series from its inception to today. It was definitely no easy feat playing and reviewing over 20-40 hour JRPGs, but I am so happy to finally be at the end and not have to touch another Tales game for at least another couple of months. So join me next time as I dive into a bunch of my backlog as I try to finish up my other retrospective series.